Sarah Montgomery, a fierce rancher in Texas, had always prided herself on her independence and love for the land. One evening, while performing a routine task, she disappeared without a trace. For 9 long years, her family was left with nothing but questions. But when an unexpected discovery is made in the desert, a new chapter begins. Emma, Sarah's younger sister, embarks on a journey that will uncover dark secrets and force her to confront a powerful conspiracy. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the barren stretch of land that was Sarah's pride and joy. Her Texas ranch had been in her family for generations, but it was her blood, sweat, and determination that had kept it alive through the toughest of times. The wide expanse of the dry desert terrain stretched out before her, as familiar as the calluses on her hands. It was an ordinary evening, one she had seen 1,000 times before. She climbed into her trusty pickup truck, the engine rumbling to life with a sound that was as comforting as the morning rooster's crow. She had work to do. The cattle needed to be moved from one grazing area to another before the night set in completely. A task she had done countless times, without thinking, without hesitation. Her truck bounced slightly over the uneven dirt road as the wind stirred up dust in the air. Sarah, always at ease behind the wheel, hummed softly to herself, the peace of the land wrapping around her like an old blanket. The ranch was everything to her, and nothing, she believed, could ever change that. But tonight was different. It wasn't the work, or the weather, or even the isolation. It was something unspoken, something she couldn't quite place. She had always trusted her instincts, a necessary skill for anyone who lived out here. But tonight, for the first time, her instincts fell off. She didn't know what it was, but there was a sense of unease, a prickle along her spine, as if someone, somewhere, was watching her. Still, she pushed it aside. There was nothing unusual about the task ahead, nothing that could change the course of her evening. She continued on, her headlights cutting through the darkening landscape, the faint outline of the cattle silhouetted against the fading light. The minutes ticked by, and Sarah never imagined that this drive would be her last. She reached the farthest corner of the ranch, where the herd of cattle was gathered for the evening move. The cattle were restless, shifting uneasily as the temperature dropped and the night set in. She parked the truck near the grazing area and stepped out, the dry earth crunching beneath her boots. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a pale, silver light over the vast plains. It was a beautiful sight, one Sarah had come to appreciate, but tonight, even the beauty of the land felt somehow distant. She went about her task methodically, guiding the cattle into their new position with ease. There was nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that should have caused alarm, but that persistent feeling of unease tugged at her. She couldn't shake it. She glanced around, as if expecting to see something, anything, that would explain the strange sensation creeping over her. But there was nothing, just the sound of hooves and the whisper of the wind through the tall grasses. As the last of the cattle was moved, Sarah climbed back in her truck, the engine rumbling once again as she prepared to head back to the ranch house. She checked the time. It was just past 8. A few more miles, and she'd be home. The night was settling in, the stars slowly beginning to emerge above her. But something felt wrong. She drove on, the headlights of her truck cutting through the dust and the darkness. The vast, empty land stretched out on either side of her. The familiar sights of the ranch seemed to blur in her rearview mirror. She wasn't sure why, but she kept glancing back. The unease was growing. A sudden noise, a thud, followed by a soft, grinding sound, interrupted her thoughts. Sarah's grip on the steering wheel tightened, and she glanced down at the dashboard. Everything seemed fine. She slowed the truck, scanning the road ahead, but nothing was out of place. She glanced again at the rearview mirror. The land behind her was still empty, save for the occasional rustle of wind-blown grass. She didn't know why, but she had the overwhelming feeling that something was following her, something that didn't belong in the quiet desert night. Her eyes snapped back to the road ahead, just in time to see the headlights of an approaching vehicle. Too close, too fast. She barely had time to react. The truck jerked violently, the wheels skidding on the loose dirt as she tried to regain control. In that brief, disorienting moment, the truck veered off course. And then silence. When Sarah didn't return home that night, the family knew something was wrong. Her father, a weathered man with the same land in his veins, paced the porch, staring into the dark horizon. She had always been back before the stars were fully out. Always. But not tonight. Her mother, ever the calm force, tried to hide the concern in her voice as she called Sarah's phone. No answer. Panic began to creep in. The next morning, the sheriff's department was called. A full search was launched, but no one found anything. Her truck was gone, and there were no signs of struggle, no tracks leading away from the ranch. It was as if Sarah had simply vanished into thin air. Days turned into weeks, and the search grew colder. The land around them, once so full of life and purpose, now felt empty. The family clung to the hope that she'd return, that somehow Sarah would walk through the door and everything would go back to normal. But Sarah never came home. 9 years passed. The land kept stretching out, unchanged beneath the sun. The ranch kept running, though it was a shadow of what it once was. And in all that time, no one had ever uncovered the truth. Until now. The days turned to weeks, the weeks into months, and the months into years. Life on the ranch continued, but it was never the same without Sarah. The land that had once felt so full of life and purpose now seemed hollow, as if something essential had been ripped away. Her father, old and worn, kept his eyes fixed on the horizon every evening, his thoughts as distant as the faint outline of the mountains in the distance. He'd walk to the barn in the mornings, as if Sarah would suddenly be there, waiting to help him feed the cattle, just like she always had. But she never was. Her mother, once a pillar of strength, had withered. The lines on her face deepened, her eyes hollowed. The house, once filled with warmth and the scent of home-cooked meals, now stood silent. There was a coldness that permeated every room. When she spoke of Sarah, her voice cracked. And when she didn't speak of her, it was as if she were trying to avoid the hole in her chest that could never be filled. Emma, Sarah's younger sister, had taken up the mantle of managing the ranch. At first, she didn't know how to continue without Sarah. She hadn't known anything about the day-to-day work of the ranch. That was Sarah's domain. Emma had been the dreamer, the one who wanted to leave for the city to explore the world beyond their small Texas town. But the disappearance had shattered that dream. There was no time for dreams when the ranch was falling apart. Each day, Emma worked the land with the same precision that Sarah once had, but it never felt right. Every movement was a reminder that her sister should have been there beside her, guiding her, laughing with her. Emma would sometimes pause in the middle of her chores, looking over the empty fields, her hands gripped tightly around the reins of her horse. She imagined Sarah there beside her, the way things used to be. It felt as if the weight of the loss pressed down on her, never letting up. The community was no better off. The neighbors who once dropped by for a drink or a quick chat had grown distant. They didn't know how to talk to the family anymore. People didn't know how to grieve for someone who was still technically alive, yet gone. They had stopped offering help, stopped checking in. Slowly, Sarah's name faded from their lips as time passed. It became a quiet, uncomfortable subject that no one dared to bring up. Everyone moved on, but Emma couldn't. Every year, on the anniversary of Sarah's disappearance, Emma would go to the edge of the ranch and stand there, staring into the vastness of the empty desert. She would wait, not knowing exactly what she was waiting for, but hoping that somehow, some way, she would get a sign, a clue, anything that would tell her where Sarah had gone, why she had disappeared. But the silence was always the same, unforgiving, eternal. The sheriff's department, once so hopeful, had long given up. The case was closed, the evidence all pointing to the fact that Sarah had simply driven off and vanished. Perhaps she had gone off to start a new life, or worse, had met some unfortunate end in the unforgiving wilderness. But no one knew for sure, and that was the most painful part, the uncertainty. Years passed, and the ranch became more of a duty than a home. Emma worked tirelessly, but the joy had long since gone. She tried to keep it all together for the sake of her family, but there were days when it felt like she was drowning, struggling just to keep her head above water. The people who had once come by for a chat or to lend a hand now seemed like distant memories. The old, tight-knit community had faded into a whisper, and Emma couldn't shake the feeling of isolation. Every night, Emma would go to bed exhausted, her mind racing with thoughts of what might have happened to Sarah. She often woke up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, her heart pounding. Sometimes, in those moments of half-sleep, she would hear Sarah's voice calling out to her, just as it had when they were younger. It was only a dream, but Emma couldn't help the hope that sparked in her chest each time. Every time she let herself hope, only to wake up and realize it was all just a cruel illusion. She kept the ranch running, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. The land was beginning to show signs of wear, and Emma was struggling to manage it all alone. There were moments when she would sit on the porch, staring out at the empty plains, and wonder how much longer she could hold on, how much longer she could keep the farm alive. She had tried to keep Sarah's memory alive, keeping the family traditions, maintaining the same routines that Sarah had followed. But everything felt like it was slipping through her fingers. Then, one day, out of nowhere, something changed. The desert, that unforgiving expanse of land, gave up a secret it had kept for so long. It would be a discovery that would shake the very foundations of Emma's understanding of what had happened to Sarah. It started with a phone call from the sheriff's office, a call that Emma never expected to receive. A call that, in the depths of her grief, she had stopped expecting at all. But this time, the voice on the other end was different. The sheriff had some news. They'd found something. The phone call came in the middle of the morning, when the sun was still low and the dry heat of the Texas desert hadn't quite settled in yet. Emma had just finished feeding the cattle and was taking a brief break, sitting on the edge of the porch with a cup of coffee in hand. The land stretched before her, quiet and vast, the only sound being the occasional rustle of wind moving through the tall grasses. It was in moments like these, with the solitude settling in, that she could almost hear Sarah's laughter in the distance, a memory that still haunted her. When the sheriff's deputy spoke, Emma nearly dropped her cup. His voice was calm, professional, but there was an edge to it, something she couldn't place. "We found something, Emma. Something you need to see." The words hit her like a thunderclap, and for a moment, she couldn't breathe. Her heart started to race, and her hands trembled around the cup she had clutched too tightly. "What do you mean, found something? What's going on?" "There's a team of oil drillers working on the west side of the ranch. They've uncovered a vehicle, an old pickup truck. It's yours, or at least it's Sarah's." Emma's blood ran cold, and the cup slipped from her fingers, landing with a dull thud on the porch floor. She stood there, frozen for a moment, trying to process what he had just said. Sarah's truck? How could that be? How could it have been so close all these years, buried somewhere in the desert she had known so well? "Are you sure?" Her voice cracked as she spoke. "Yes, ma'am. It's her truck. It was buried pretty deep, but we got it out now. The crew's still working on it. We'll meet you there. You need to come." Emma didn't wait for him to say more. She grabbed her keys, her heart pounding in her chest, and ran to the truck. Her hands shook as she started the engine, and the wheels kicked up dust as she sped across the familiar terrain toward the west side of the ranch, where the oil drilling team had been working for months. As she drove, her mind raced. She tried to prepare herself for what she might find, but she couldn't. The thought that Sarah's truck had been so close, that it had been right there all these years, hidden beneath the earth, was too much. It was both a relief and a fresh wound, reopening the years of questions, the unanswered pleas. Why had it been buried? How could they have missed it? When she arrived at the site, the scene was almost surreal. The drilling crew was still at work, heavy machinery surrounding the area, the sounds of metal and engines filling the air. The truck, her sister's truck, sat in the middle of a large, shallow pit, caked in dirt and mud. It was as if the earth itself had tried to swallow it whole. The vehicle was battered, weathered by years of neglect, but the distinct faded red paint and familiar features told her all she needed to know. Emma's heart ached as she approached the truck. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment, she couldn't speak. She was frozen, staring at the truck that had once carried Sarah across the land she had loved so much. The windshield was cracked, and the passenger side door was slightly ajar. There was no sign of Sarah, no blood, no signs of struggle, just a truck, eerily undisturbed. The sheriff approached her, his expression somber. "We've gone through it. No signs of struggle. No signs of foul play, at least not physically. We've taken everything back to the station. We're going to go through all, piece by piece." But what? Emma interrupted, her voice tight. She felt a cold shiver run down her spine. "We found something. In the glove box. A letter." Emma's stomach dropped. A letter? Sarah had left a letter behind. Emma followed the sheriff to the truck and watched as he carefully opened the glove box, taking out a folded piece of paper. It was yellowed and worn, as if it had been sitting there for a long time. Sarah's handwriting, neat and deliberate, was unmistakable. She took the letter from the sheriff's hand, her fingers trembling as she unfolded it. The paper crackled slightly, the words scrawled across the surface as if Sarah had been trying to write something important, something urgent. The letter read, "I know I've been followed. I don't know who or why, but I've felt it for days. The land, it's in danger, and I can't let them take it. If anything happens to me, I need you to find the truth. The ranch, it's more than just a piece of land. It's mine. No one will take it. Not without a fight." Emma's breath hitched as she read the words. The letter was a warning, a plea for help. Sarah had known something was wrong, and she had been trying to protect the land, the family, and herself. But what had happened? Had she been threatened? Had she been taken? Emma's eyes blurred with tears. She had hoped for some sign, some clue. But this was more than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just a disappearance. It was something bigger. Sarah had known. She had known she was being watched, and she had been preparing for something Emma now had to uncover. "What does it mean?" Emma whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "Why didn't she tell me? Why didn't she trust me with this?" The sheriff placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice low and comforting. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Emma. We won't stop until we have all the answers." Emma nodded, though her mind was racing. This was no longer just about finding her sister. It was about uncovering a conspiracy, about exposing those who would stop at nothing to take everything they had. Sarah had left behind more than just a truck. She had left behind the key to a mystery that was now waiting to be solved. Emma sat in the sheriff's office, the air thick with the scent of old paperwork and the faint hum of a ceiling fan. Her fingers traced the edges of the letter Sarah had left behind, the words still echoing in her mind. "The ranch, it's mine. No one will take it." Her heart raced as the weight of Sarah's message settled heavily in her chest. The sheriff had sent the truck and its contents to the crime lab. They were running tests on the letter, on any traces of evidence they could find, but for now, all Emma could do was wait. The truth, she felt, was just beyond her reach, but with every minute that ticked by, the need to uncover it grew stronger. She had to know. She couldn't let Sarah's warning go unheard. "Emma, come look at this," the sheriff's voice called out from the back of the office, pulling her from her thoughts. She followed him to his desk, where a stack of papers was spread out, a few photographs scattered on top. He handed her a set of prints, the images blurry but still unmistakable. It was a grainy surveillance photo taken from a camera somewhere off the ranch. A man was visible, standing near the edge of their property, someone Emma didn't recognize. His face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, but his posture, the way he held himself, made him stand out as more than just a passerby. Emma's heart skipped a beat. The man in the photo had been watching the ranch, watching Sarah. She could feel it in her bones. "That's him," she said, almost to herself. "I knew it. I've seen him. I've seen someone like him around here before, just never close enough to catch." The sheriff nodded, his face serious. "We've been digging into his background. His name's Hank Jameson, a local land developer. He's been trying to buy up property in the area for the past few years, including a ranch. He's made multiple offers. Sarah always turned him down." Emma's mind raced. She knew Sarah had been adamant about keeping the ranch in the family, but she had never realized just how far people were willing to go to force her into selling. The idea that someone had been lurking on their land, watching them, wasn't just unsettling, it was terrifying, Do you think he had something to do with her disappearance? Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The thought hung in the air, chilling in its implication. We're looking into it, the sheriff said, his eyes narrowing. But it's more complicated than that. We have some reason to believe that Jameson wasn't working alone. There's more going on here than just a land deal. Emma swallowed hard. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something, about to step into the unknown, but she couldn't turn back now. She had to keep going. For Sarah. For the truth. Is there more? Emma asked, the urgency in her voice unmistakable. The sheriff paused, then nodded. Yes, there's more in the truck. We found a journal, hidden beneath the seat. It was Sarah's. Emma felt her breath catch. A journal. Sarah's private thoughts. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the sheriff, the weight of what he had just revealed hitting her like a ton of bricks. We've barely started going through it, the sheriff continued. But from what we've seen, Sarah had been keeping track of everything. The strange visits, the calls she'd gotten, the people asking questions. She knew something was off, and she was trying to protect herself, to protect the ranch. Emma's hands trembled as she took the journal from the sheriff's desk. It was old, the leather cover cracked and worn, and the pages inside were yellowed with time. She opened it carefully, her fingers brushing over the ink, recognizing Sarah's familiar handwriting. The first entry was dated a few weeks before Sarah had disappeared. The land is more than just dirt. It's a part of me, part of this family. But lately, I've been feeling the pressure. People asking questions. Strange cars driving by at night. There's talk of the land being sold. I know that's what they want, but I can't let it go. Not without a fight. Emma's eyes blurred with tears as she read the words. Sarah had been fighting for the ranch, for their family's legacy. And in the end, she had been alone in that fight. The next entry was even more telling. I've noticed someone following me. I've tried to ignore it, but it's getting worse. I think they're trying to scare me. They're watching me. And I don't think it's just Jameson anymore. There's someone else. Someone who wants this land more than he does. The final entry was the one that sent a chill through Emma's spine. I can't keep running from this. The pressure is too much. If anything happens to me, if I disappear like I think I might, they'll have one. But I won't let them take the ranch. If they want it, they'll have to go through me first. Emma closed the journal slowly, her fingers shaking with a mix of grief and fury. Sarah had known. She had known she was being watched, and she had been trying to protect the family in their home. But how had it all gone so wrong? How had it escalated to this? Sheriff, I need to know everything, Emma said, her voice firm despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. Whatever it takes, I'm going after them. I won't stop until I have the truth. The sheriff's face softened, a look of respect in his eyes. We'll help you, Emma. We'll get to the bottom of this. Together. Emma stood up, the journal clutched tightly in her hands. She had a mission now. She had to find the people responsible for Sarah's disappearance. She had to uncover the full truth, no matter how dark it might be. The days that followed the discovery of Sarah's journal were a blur of long nights and endless hours spent in the sheriff's office, poring over evidence and leads. Emma's world had shifted, everything she thought she knew about her sister's disappearance now in question. The journal had revealed so much. The pressure Sarah had been under, the fear that had driven her to take matters into her own hands, the mystery of the shadowy figures watching the ranch. But it hadn't given her all the answers. Emma still had too many questions. The search for the truth was not going to be easy. The deeper Emma dug, the more convoluted things became. She learned that Hank Jameson, the local land developer, wasn't the only one involved. There were whispers of other powerful people, men with connections to local officials, whose names kept appearing in the journal, though they were always veiled in ambiguity. But one thing was becoming clear. Someone had been willing to do whatever it took to get control of the land Sarah had sworn to protect. It wasn't just about money or business. There was something more personal at play. Emma could feel in her gut. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the picture was still incomplete. The sheriff had managed to track down more about Jameson's activities, finding that he had been involved in several questionable land deals in the area. Deals that were pushed through with minimal scrutiny, often using shady methods to buy out small-time ranchers and landowners. But there was something about Sarah's refusal to sell that had made her a target. The sheriff wasn't sure why yet, but he promised Emma they would find out. Emma decided to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't sit back and wait for someone else to solve this. She had to act. The sheriff's office was helpful, but they weren't moving fast enough, and every second counted. Emma had one last lead to follow, a name that had been mentioned in Sarah's journal more than once. Lucas Crawford. Crawford was one of Jameson's closest associates, a man known for his connections to the local government and his ability to bend the rules. He was also one of the last people to have seen Sarah live, and Emma needed to know what he knew. She had been cautious in her approach, but something told her that Crawford wasn't going to make it easy. He lived just outside town, in a sprawling house that sat far from the beaten path, an estate that gave him the kind of power and prestige that Emma hated to think about. He was someone who had likely never worked a hard day in his life, and his wealth had made him arrogant, untouchable. But Emma wasn't afraid. Her sister's life depended on it. She pulled into the long driveway, her tires kicking up dust as she made her way to the front door. As she parked, she could see the faint outline of a man in the distance, standing on the porch with his hands in his pockets, watching her approach. Lucas Crawford. He was exactly as Sarah had described him in her journal, tall, well-groomed, and wearing the kind of cold, calculating look that made Emma's skin crawl. She climbed out of the truck and walked toward him, trying to steady her breath. Every step was a reminder of how far she had come. She was no longer the frightened sister of a missing person. She was someone with a purpose. "You're Emma, right?" Crawford's voice was smooth, almost too smooth, as if he were trying to charm her. "I heard you were looking for me." Emma stopped a few feet from him, not backing down, not giving him the satisfaction of seeing any fear in her eyes. "I need answers. I need to know what happened to my sister." Crawford studied her for a moment, his eyes flicking over her with that practiced indifference that seemed to define everything he did. "I'm afraid I can't help you with that, Emma. I don't know where your sister went. She was never my problem." She took a deep breath, forcing the anger that was rising inside her down. "You were involved with Jameson, weren't you? You've been buying up land, and Sarah wouldn't sell. You were threatening her, weren't you?" Crawford's face twitched, just for a moment, before he regained his composure. "I don't know where you're getting your information, but I don't deal with threats. You should be careful making accusations like that." "I'm not accusing," Emma shot back, her voice hardening. "I'm asking. I've been to the sheriff's office, and I've seen the photos. I know you've been following Sarah. I know you've been pressuring her to sell, and I know you were the last person she saw before she disappeared. I want to know what happened to her." Crawford's eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, Emma. The people you're asking about are dangerous. They don't care about you or your ranch. They never did. You're not ready for the truth." "Then tell me," Emma said, stepping forward. "Tell me what happened." "I'm ready." For a long moment, Crawford stood there, his lips pressed tight together, as if deciding whether or not to speak. Finally, he took a step back, a smile spreading across his face. "You think you're the first one to ask questions about this land? You think Sarah was the first to resist? People like you don't understand the bigger picture." Emma's pulse quickened. "What are you talking about?" "The land isn't just land, Emma," Crawford said, his voice lowering. "It's worth more than you could ever imagine. And there are people who want it, people who will do anything to get it. You think Sarah was the first to stand in their way? She won't be the last." A chill ran down Emma's spine. She felt like she was standing on the edge of something far darker than she had imagined. Crawford wasn't just talking about money. He was talking about power, about something much bigger than a simple land deal. He turned his back on her, signaling that their conversation was over. "You're wasting your time, Emma. Go back to your ranch, or you'll regret it." Emma stood there, stunned, her heart pounding. She had gotten closer to the truth, but it was still just out of reach. There were more players involved, more dangers lurking in the shadows. But now, at least, she knew she had to go deeper, much deeper, to uncover the full scope of the conspiracy. The sun was beginning to set as Emma made her way back to the ranch, her mind racing with the implications of her meeting with Lucas Crawford. His cryptic words echoed in her head like a warning, his smug dismissal of her questions only pushing her to dig deeper. She hadn't gotten the answer she wanted, but she had learned something crucial. There was more to this than just a land deal, and Sarah's fight had been much bigger than Emma could have ever imagined. The evening air felt heavy with uncertainty as Emma drove back along the dirt roads, her truck bouncing over the uneven terrain. Her eyes flicked over the familiar stretches of land, but the ranch no longer seemed like the peaceful place it once had been. Every rock, every tree, every fence post felt like a reminder of what had been lost. Her sister had fought to keep it, but at what cost? What had Sarah uncovered that had made her target? She arrived back at the ranch just as the sky was turning a deep shade of orange, the long shadows stretching across the field. The house stood in the distance, quiet and imposing. Emma's heart clenched in her chest. She hadn't found what she was looking for yet, but she was getting closer. The truth was there, hidden somewhere in the land, in the soil beneath her feet, in the walls of the house, in the remnants of Sarah's old life. As she stepped out of the truck, the feeling of being watched returned, that nagging sensation that had haunted her since the day Sarah disappeared. Emma glanced around, half expecting to see someone standing in the distance, hidden among the shadows. But the land was still, the wind barely a whisper in the trees. She tried to shake the feeling, but it wouldn't leave. Something was wrong, something she hadn't yet discovered. Emma walked toward the barn, where the tools were stored, her boots kicking up dust with every step. There was something she had been avoiding, a place on the ranch she hadn't dared go back to since Sarah's disappearance. The old barn on the far side of the property had always been their secret spot, a place where they'd talk about their hopes and dreams, away from the eyes of their parents and the watchful gaze of the world. But it was also the place where the last traces of Sarah had been found, and for a long time, Emma couldn't bear to go near it. Tonight, though, something felt different. She couldn't ignore it any longer. There was something in that barn that she needed to see. The barn was old, the wooden beams weathered with age, the roof sagging in places from years of wear. She had been inside countless times, but this time it felt more like an interrogation. She hesitated at the door, feeling the weight of her past pushing down on her. With a deep breath, Emma pushed the door open. The familiar scent of hay and old wood hit her as she stepped inside. The barn was dimly lit, the only light coming from the cracks in the walls and the faint glow of the setting sun outside. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was suffocating. Emma slowly made her way past the old stalls, her eyes scanning the room, her heart pounding with each step. And then something caught her eye. Near the back of the barn, tucked away in the far corner, was a small, dusty chest. It was old, its leather straps cracked and faded with time. Emma approached it cautiously, her hands trembling as she knelt down to open it. She hadn't seen this chest before. It had to be something Sarah had hidden. With a soft creak, the chest opened, revealing a collection of items, old maps, papers, and a few personal effects. As Emma sifted through the contents, she found something that made her blood run cold. A small folder, its edges worn, containing photographs of people she didn't recognize. At first glance, they seemed innocuous enough, just strangers posing together in various locations. But as she examined them more closely, her stomach churned. The first photo was of a group of men standing in front of a large building, a building Emma recognized from town. It was the office of the local government, where land deals and contracts were signed. But it wasn't just the building that caught her attention. One of the men in the photo was Lucas Crawford, and another man, a man she didn't recognize, was standing beside him. He was tall, with dark hair and a piercing gaze that seemed to stare straight into the camera. Emma's heart skipped a beat. This man was someone important. But who was he? And why had Sarah kept a photo of him? The second photograph was even more telling. It showed the same man, this time with Hank Jameson, the land developer. They were standing together in what looked like a secluded area, the kind of place where business deals went unnoticed, hidden away from the public eye. The photo seemed to imply that Jameson and this man were working together, and judging by the way they were standing, with hands clasped and smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes, it was clear that something shady was going on. Emma's mind raced. These are no ordinary photos. They were evidence. Evidence of something much darker than she had anticipated. Her sister had known. She had known about the connections, the deals, the people behind them. Sarah had been onto something big. But what was the connection between Jameson, Crawford, and this mysterious man? And how did it all tie back to Sarah's disappearance? Emma closed the chest slowly, her thoughts swirling. She had one lead left. There was someone else she needed to speak to. Someone who might know more about this man in the photograph. She couldn't ignore it any longer. The truth was within her grasp, but she needed to move quickly. As she stood up and closed the barn door behind her, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the ground beneath her feet was shifting, that she was walking a path she could no longer turn back from. The hunt for Sarah's killers had just begun. The days after Emma's discovery in the barn passed in a blur of confusion and urgency. The photographs she found had opened a door, leading her to the revelation of Victor Hale's involvement in the conspiracy that had been shadowing their ranch. Hale wasn't just another land developer. He was the key to everything. His connections with Jameson and Crawford pointed to something far bigger than a simple land deal. Sarah had been trying to stop it, and in doing so, had made herself a target. Emma couldn't wait any longer. She had to confront Hale, the man who seemed to pull the strings behind this whole operation. Everything had been leading to him. He was powerful, untouchable, and yet Sarah had somehow gotten under his radar, enough to make him want to silence her. The estate was everything Emma had imagined, sprawling, cold, and imposing. The long driveway led to an enormous mansion, its windows dark like the eyes of its owner. As she parked her truck and walked to the door, the weight of everything she had uncovered pressed heavily on her chest. This was the moment. She couldn't back down now. Hale answered the door before she even knocked. His sharp eyes studied her, unreadable. "Emma," he greeted with a calmness that sent a chill through her. "I've been expecting you. I want answers," Emma said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "I want to know what happened to my sister." Hale stepped aside, gesturing for her to come in. "Come in, then. Let's talk." Inside, the mansion felt even more imposing. The walls were lined with expensive art, and the soft hum of a grand chandelier hanging above created an eerie atmosphere. Emma couldn't focus on the opulence. She was here for one reason, and that reason was standing in front of her. "I know who you are," Emma said, her voice firm as she crossed her arms. "I know what you've done, and I know you were involved with Sarah's disappearance. You've been trying to take our land for years, and now you've killed her for it." Hale looked at her for a long moment, almost amused, before he leaned back in his chair. "Your sister was an obstacle, Emma," he said slowly, as if explaining something to a child. "People like her don't understand what's really at stake here. The ranch was valuable, yes, but it was more than that. It was about control. The land is just a piece of the puzzle." Emma's stomach dropped as the truth settled in. "What do you mean by that?" she demanded. Hale's expression turned cold. "The land isn't just about farming. It's about resources, power, and influence. People like me don't deal in dirt and crops. We deal in things that matter. The future, investments, the kind of power that changes things on a grand scale." He paused, his gaze sharpening. "Your sister, bless her heart, didn't understand. She stood in the way of progress." Emma felt a flash of rage. "So you just kill anyone who stands in your way?" Hale's smile was thin, almost predatory. "Not kill. Eliminate. There's a difference." He leaned forward, his voice softening. "The truth is, Emma, your sister was small-minded. She couldn't see the bigger picture. But you're smarter than that. You must see what's at stake." Emma's mind raced as Hale continued, trying to make sense of his words. "You want to control everything, don't you? The land, the resources, all of it." Hale's eyes gleamed. "Exactly. And the problem with people like Sarah was that they believe the land belonged to them, to their families. They think they can hold on to it forever. But things change. Times change. And I have no time for those who refuse to see that." Emma's blood boiled. "You'll never get away with this. Ha le chocolate darkly. You're free to think that. But the reality is, you can't stop what's already in motion. Sarah was just the beginning, Emma. People like her are always in the way, and they're always dealt with. You think you can come here, confront me, and change things? You have no idea what you're up against. Emma stepped closer, her eyes narrowing with determination. I'm not afraid of you, Hale. I will stop you, no matter what it takes. Hale's smile faltered for just a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. We'll see about that. Emma felt a sense of finality in the air, like she had reached the point of no return. But this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of the real fight. She had to expose Hale for who he truly was and take him down before he could do more damage. Turning on her heel, Emma stormed out of the mansion, a burning resolve in her chest. She had all the pieces now. The truth was out, and the fight for the ranch, for Sarah's legacy, was far from over. The night after Emma's confrontation with Victor Hale, she barely slept. Her mind kept returning to the conversation in his mansion, the chilling calmness with which he spoke about Sarah's death and his plans for the ranch. He had dismissed her, and yet, in his eyes, she saw something more dangerous than mere arrogance, a certainty that he had the upper hand. It made her blood run cold, but it also fueled her resolve. Hale had underestimated her, just like he had underestimated Sarah. But now Emma had to act quickly. Hale was powerful, and every passing day brought him closer to whatever endgame he was playing. She needed to find something, some final piece of evidence that would bring him down once and for all. The question was, where to look next? The barn, the ranch itself. If there was something out there, some hidden truth Sarah had left behind, or something Hale had overlooked, it would be found in the land Sarah had loved. But Emma wasn't alone in her search. The sheriff had agreed to help, knowing that this wasn't just about a missing person anymore. It was a conspiracy, a system of greed and manipulation, and the whole town needed to see it for what it was. At dawn, Emma met the sheriff at the edge of the ranch. The sun was barely rising, casting long shadows over the fields that stretched endlessly in front of them. Together, they would comb every inch of the property, retracing Sarah's steps, hoping for a clue that might have been missed before. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, but she pushed the fear aside. She had no choice but to keep going. They started near the western edge of the ranch, where the oil drilling team had first uncovered Sarah's truck. The place had a strange feel to it, like something hidden beneath the surface, something no one had wanted to uncover. The sheriff walked ahead, his boots crunching the dry earth as Emma followed, her eyes scanning the landscape. Any idea where Sarah might have gone? The sheriff asked, his voice low but steady. I think she knew she was being watched, Emma replied, her eyes still fixed on the land. She was always suspicious of the people who wanted the ranch, but she wouldn't give up. She couldn't. This was her home. The sheriff nodded. And she left something behind for you, didn't she? Emma didn't answer immediately. Sarah had left more than just the journal and the photographs. She had left her legacy, the ranch that had always been more than a piece of land. But there was something Emma had been missing. She could feel it. They moved further into the field, toward the farthest corner of the ranch, the place where the land seemed to stretch forever. It was there that Sarah had once stood, gazing out across the plains, dreaming of a future that now felt like a distant memory. Look there, Emma said suddenly, pointing to the ground ahead of them. There was something half buried in the dirt, just barely visible in the early morning light. The sheriff knelt down, brushing aside the dirt. It was a small, weathered metal box, the kind of box that could have been left behind by someone trying to hide something. Emma's heart skipped a beat as she realized this could be the final piece she'd been searching for. Together, they pried open the box, their hands shaking with anticipation. Inside, they found a collection of papers, maps, and a stack of photographs. The photographs were old, but they were unmistakable. One of them showed a group of men standing in front of a massive building, the same men from the earlier photos. Hale, Jameson, Crawford, and the same mysterious man Emma had seen before. They were all together, standing proudly in front of the same office building where many of the land deals had been made. But it wasn't just the men in the photographs that caught Emma's attention. It was what was written on the back of one of the photos. The deal is almost done. Once the land is ours, there's nothing they can do. We'll control everything. It was clear now. Hale, Jameson, and their associates weren't just looking to acquire Sarah's ranch. They were part of a larger scheme, one that extended far beyond the borders of Emma's family's land. They were taking control of the entire region, manipulating everyone in their way to further their own gain. Emma's hands trembled as she held the photo. This was it, the proof she needed to take them down. Hale's empire was built on lies and violence, and now she had the evidence to expose it all. But there was one thing left to do. The sheriff stood up, looking at Emma. "You've got now, Emma. This is enough to bring them all down." Emma nodded, her heart pounding. "It's not over yet. We need to make sure this gets to the right people." They made their way back to the truck, the box of evidence clutched tightly in Emma's hands. This was only the beginning. Hale's empire of corruption wouldn't be able to hide behind power and lies forever. Emma had the truth now, and she was going to make sure it saw the light of day. The night Emma spent going over the photographs and documents felt like the longest of her life. The weight of the evidence, the names, the connections, the dark web of corruption weighed heavily on her shoulders. She had the proof now, but with it came the undeniable truth that her sister's death, her disappearance, had been part of something much bigger. And while she could now expose those responsible, the risk was far from over. The power that Hale and his associates wielded was immense. But Emma couldn't stop. She had already come this far, and there was no turning back. The following morning, Emma met with the sheriff again, this time in the town's small but busy courthouse. He had promised to help her, and they both knew that this was the only chance they had to bring the truth to light. The sheriff had already begun the process of contacting federal authorities, but it was clear that the town itself was too entrenched in Hale's influence. The local law enforcement wasn't enough to tackle something this deep. "I'll take this to the state prosecutor," the sheriff said, his voice steady. "I've seen what Hale is capable of, but we have the evidence now. With this, we can go to court. We can bring him down." Emma nodded, though her heart was heavy. She had waited so long for this moment. But the idea of the trial, of exposing everything, made her stomach turn. She wasn't just fighting for justice anymore. She was fighting for her sister's memory, for the life Sarah had fought so hard to protect. And that was a fight Emma couldn't back down from. They arrived at the prosecutor's office, where the evidence was presented in full. Photographs, documents, even the map Sarah had kept hidden. It was clear to everyone who looked at the evidence that Hale's operations went far beyond land deals. He was involved in a vast network of illegal activities, from bribery and corruption to land theft and even threats against local families who refused to sell. And Sarah, in her defiance, had uncovered it all. The prosecutor's face was grim as she reviewed the files. "This is solid. We can press charges, and we will. But we need to make sure everything is in place. We'll need more testimonies, more cooperation from anyone who was involved." "I know someone who can help," the sheriff said. "I've already been in contact with a few other people who were close to Hale's operation. They'll talk once they see the evidence." Emma stood silent, her hands clenched at her sides. She was so close, yet the enormity of it all still hit her in waves. The town, the land, everything she had known, it had all been built on lies. Sarah had known the truth. She had fought to protect everything that was good about their family, their land. And now, Emma had to finish what Sarah had started. Over the next few days, the investigation moved quickly. More people came forward, former employees, whistleblowers who had been too afraid to speak out before. Slowly, piece by piece, the layers of Hale's empire were peeled back, exposing the full extent of his crimes. The truth came rushing to the surface, and with it came the inevitable fallout. Victor Hale was arrested. So were several of his associates, including Jameson and Crawford. The charges ranged from bribery to conspiracy, with evidence tying them to illegal land grabs, threats, and even the disappearance of Sarah. The trial was long and arduous, but the evidence was undeniable. Hale's smirk faded with every testimony, every new revelation. He had built his empire on fear, on manipulating people, but in the end, it was the truth that had brought him down. The verdict came after a week of deliberations. Hale was sentenced to life in prison, and his assets were seized. The rest of his associates were given various sentences, though none were as severe as Hale's. The case against them had been overwhelming, and the evidence presented in court left no room for doubt. As Emma stood outside the courthouse, the weight that had settled on her shoulders for so many years finally began to lift. Justice had been served, but it wasn't just about the court case. It was about Sarah. Sarah's fight, her determination, her love for the land. It had all led to this moment. Emma felt her sister's presence, as if Sarah had never really left. For the first time in years, Emma felt a sense of peace. The ranch, the land Sarah had fought to protect, was now safe. And Emma, in her quiet way, had completed the legacy that Sarah had left behind. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Emma was ready. The ranch would live on, and so would Sarah's memory. The days following the trial were quiet, almost too quiet. The weight of everything that had happened still lingered, but Emma could finally breathe a little easier. Hale was behind bars, and his empire had crumbled. The ranch, once under threat, was safe again, but now it was time to rebuild. Not just the land, but everything that had been lost over the years. As Emma stood at the edge of the property, looking out across the familiar fields where Sarah had once walked, she could feel her sister's presence in every corner of the land. The wind whispered through the trees, and the distant sound of the cattle seemed to carry Sarah's spirit. She had fought for this, and now it was Emma's turn to carry the torch. The house had always been a place of warmth and love, but it had been silent for too long. Emma decided to open the doors again, not just for herself, but for the people who had stood by her during this journey. Neighbors who had once kept their distance were starting to come around again, ready to rebuild the community they had lost. Slowly, the ranch began to come back to life, just as Sarah had always imagined. Emma spent her days working the land, keeping the family traditions alive, just as Sarah had done. The sunrises were a little brighter, the air a little clearer. But the emptiness of losing her sister was something Emma would never fully overcome. There were days when the longing to see Sarah again, to hear her voice, felt almost unbearable. But Sarah's memory lived on in everything Emma did. The ranch was more than just land. It was a piece of their family's legacy. And that was something no one could take away. One evening, as Emma sat on the porch, watching the sunset, a familiar figure approached from a distance. It was her father, his gait slower than it had been years ago. He had never fully recovered from the loss of Sarah, but Emma could see the change in him now. The burden had lifted, and with it, the heaviness that had weighed down their lives. He was home, in every sense of the word. "I never thought we'd see the day," her father said quietly, taking a seat beside her. "I thought we'd lose it all, just like they wanted. But you've kept it going. You've kept her spirit alive." Emma smiled softly, looking out at the land once more. "It's not just me. It's all of us. And it's Sarah." They sat in silence for a while, the evening breeze carrying with it the sounds of life, the low hum of the wind, the distant calls of birds, and the steady rhythm of cattle moving in the field. For the first time in a long time, Emma felt a sense of peace settle over her. As the years passed, the ranch flourished again. Emma never forgot Sarah. The photographs, the journal, the memories, they all stayed with her, reminders of a sister who had fought for everything that mattered. She kept the traditions alive, passing them down to the next generation. The land was hers now, but it wasn't just about ownership. It was about legacy. One day, as Emma stood in the barn, organizing tools, she came across a small box hidden away on a shelf. It was the same box Sarah had once kept her most precious memories in. Emma opened it, finding a few photographs, some old letters, and one final note from Sarah. It was written in the same familiar handwriting, a message for the future. "No matter what happens, don't let them take the land. It's ours. It's ours because it's who we are." Tears welled up in Emma's eyes as she read the words. Sarah's voice echoed in her heart. They had made it through. They had fought together, and now Sarah's dream lived on. The ranch was safe, the land was protected, and Sarah's memory would never fade. The last line of the note spoke the truth Emma had always known. It's ours. It's who we are. With that, Emma placed the note back in the box and closed it, a quiet sense of finality settling over her. She was no longer carrying the burden alone. The land, the ranch, Sarah's legacy, it was all part of her now, and she would make sure it stayed that way. As Emma walked outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow across the fields. She stood there for a moment, feeling the wind on her face, knowing that no matter what, the ranch would always be home. And in her heart, Sarah's spirit would live on forever.